name is Nick. I'm going to be presenting Battle of the Stacks today. So first of all, thanks to Steve, Michelle, Christine, everyone that's volunteered to put this event together. It's really exciting to have our first Joomla Day in Atlanta, so big round of applause to them. And without further ado, I'll get into the presentation. So, first of all, I'm not a Joomla person per se. I'm not a developer. I think last time I used Joomla, it was still called Mambo. But I was invited here anyways to talk about server performance, and I think that is universal for anybody building websites today. And eventually, regardless of what your real job is, you have to go manage a server at some point. So this should be fairly useful for everyone here. All right. So first of all, what's a stack? I'll let you read that by yourself. That's the English definition of stack. None of those really fit what I'm going to be talking about today. My definition, I would say, is the components that make up your application, from the web server software to the actual code. Everything that you use to deliver those pages and applications to the users. That's what I call a stack. All right, so we're going to talk about performance. And performance doesn't just mean speed, it's speed and reliability. It's not enough to just serve pages fast. You actually have to do it, you actually have to be able to serve them at all. So when you first start coding, you can just start with your default LAMP stack. Does everybody know what LAMP stack is? Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I assume most of you use it. Or you start with a shared hosting account and you don't think twice. You just put your code up there, everything works, everything's beautiful, even looks fast. Probably because most of us don't really get a ton of traffic on a lot of the sites we build, right? So everything just works fine and we don't have to worry about it much. As your career progresses, or as your site becomes a little more popular, you start noticing that your site slows down, that sometimes it just crashes and you don't know why. And it's because the defaults are just not there for performance and reliability. So, what's the most common solution that people go for, or the first step that most people take? Yeah, you got it. Right, it's more hardware. Let's just get a bigger server. That's going to solve everything. That's a little bit of a short-sighted solution. Yeah, it'll fix things for a little bit, but then it really won't, solve the problems that you might have with non-optimized code, or bad, database queries, or just a bad configuration of your server. So it's okay to add more hardware after you've done all these other things, after you've optimized your code, which we won't cover today, and after you actually pick the right stack. So that's something that we're going to look at today. I don't expect you to learn what the right stack for your project is today. I'm not even going to show you, the super optimized stack. We're not going to go deep into, little bits of code. I just want to expose you to a few different options that are out there. Just give you a little flavor for each one. And then at the end of the session, we're actually going to pit them against each other. And, we're going to do a bracket-style tournament to see which one performs the best. Definitely not scientific, so don't base any of your future decisions, for deployments on these. But it's just to give you a little exposure to what's out there and what you could, possibly be missing out on. So, goals for this session, like we said, get a general overview and discuss some of the basics. Excellent. So, buyer beware. Like I said, only the basic stuff, and don't base your decisions on these. The setup for everything we're going to look at today, screenshots, tests, everything else, it's all been done in a 1 gigabyte RAM server running Ubuntu 12.04 LTS, hosted on DigitalOcean. So there you go. So I got a DO fan right there. I wanted to present all the different options on the exact same server. So we're comparing apples to apples. You can't just say, well, I hosted these on DigitalOcean, and this one had 2 gigs of RAM, but this one was on Rackspace with 1 gig. So all those parameters should be the same. So we get a pretty fair comparison between all the options. All right. So we'll start with the LEMP stack, the most popular. We all use it. We all just, everybody raise their hand with it. And it's so popular because it's easy to set up. Most of the time you actually can get it right out of the box, and if not, you can install it with a one-liner on Ubuntu. Just a show of hands, how many of you use Ubuntu? Cool. All right. It's 12.04 is not the newest version. I think we're up to 13.10 probably, but this is 12.04 LTS. LTS stands for long-term support. So this is popular because it's actually supported all the way through 2017. So it's extremely popular server software. So the default LAMP stack can go a fairly long way if used properly. But what makes it so popular, it's also what makes it so inadequate in many occasions, which is it's easy to set up. Nobody thinks about the configuration, and then when you get hit with a little bit of traffic, it just chugs. It's popular because you can just install it like that. It's a one-liner. You put that in your shell. You see this very popular screen. Many of you probably already seen it. You just select LAMP server. It does a little bit of magic, and you end up with this. It's a full LAMP stack. If you're on 12.04, Ubuntu 12.04, you're going to end up with PHP version 5.3.10. It's going to run Apache 2.2. And it's going to have a default configuration. The default Apache configuration is a lot bigger than this, but I wanted to focus on this block because if you ever Google for Apache performance tuning or anything like that, you're probably going to end up just messing with these settings and not much more. And that's we're actually going to look at adjusting some of those settings and what they mean later in this presentation. You also, of course, get MySQL, but we're not even covering it today. All the examples actually are running MySQL, so it didn't make a difference. The Apache version you're going to get, it's going to be running in Prefork mode. Prefork versus Worker. There are two different Apache modes. Most servers out there running Prefork. The difference is Prefork uses multiple child processes with one thread each, and each process handles one connection at a time. And the work NPM uses multiple child processes with many threads each, and each thread handles one connection at a time. Don't get bogged down in the details. It's just I needed to give you the definition. But one uses more memory, the other one uses less, and there's some other trade-offs. I just wanted you to be aware of Prefork versus Worker, and you can do all the research on your own. So the first stack that we're going to have in our competition today, we're going to actually number them. So number one is the default LAMP stack that you get right out of the box. Not optimized, but because the configuration is popular, we're just going to give it a spot in the tournament. Let's look at the second option. It's APC, the alternative PHP cache. In layman's terms, let's see. Here we actually. The alternative PHP cache is the free and open blah, bleep, 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 blah, blah framework cache and optimizing PHP intermediate code. What that means is, if you just understand in basic terms what happens when you get a request on your server, the PHP code you wrote gets interpreted and compiled down to bytecode, and that's what gets served back. What APC does is, once it interpret and compile that code, it'll save it in memory, so it doesn't have to do that entire process on the next request. So that speeds things up quite a bit. So a lot of people don't use APC because it's extremely hard to install. And no, I'm just kidding. It's actually a one-liner also. Apt-get install PHP APC, and it's done and running. And you already get the benefits just by doing that. So there's no reason not to use it. If you're running PHP 5.3 or 5.4, definitely recommend it. It comes with a lot of configuration options. Again, we're only sticking to the basics today, so we're just going to leave it like it's running right out of the box. It comes when you install it. It comes with a super handy script called apc.php. It's right there in that file that says apc.php.gc. You just decompress it, and you can run that on your server. If you're familiar with PHP info, this works in a similar way. Just point your browser to that and it'll show you stats about how APC is running. I don't know if you can read from back there, but you can see there on the top right where it says, hits 34. So it says that it's using APC 97% of the time. So it's handy to have these to know that you're actually, getting to use it and then how much it's improving your performance. So here we see that with minimal effort and $0, we can definitely add a little bit of power to our stack. And this is, of course, expected to provide improvements, but we're actually going to look at that later in the presentation. Yes?
You mentioned PHP 5.3, 5.4.
Yes.
What about 5.5?
We'll get to it.
Oh.
It's one of the stacks that's actually PHP 5.5, and we're going to look at it in just a minute.
Sorry.
No, perfect. Thanks for the question.
I'm so excited.
All right, so there's other PHP accelerators or opcode cache, optimizers, etc., that we won't be covering in this session. If you are a fan of one, feel free to raise your hand now and tell us about it. I'll give you a little bit of time to tell everybody why you like it. And if not, here's a bunch of names, of different options that you have that we won't be covering. Except for Zen Opcache, which we will be covering just a little bit. And you can see there's a link there where you can get a ton of information on these. All right, so our second stack, our second contender is the default LEMP stack plus APC. Again, to remind you, Ubuntu 12.04 LTS, Apache 2.2, PHP 5.3.10 plus APC. All right. Now let's look at the new and shiny. It's actually not so new, PHP 5.5. It's been around since June 2013, and it's the current stable version. I think beta 5.6 is out and whatnot, but haven't used it yet. 5.5 is pretty amazing, actually. The improvements are both in features and performance are really impressive. So definitely, if you are not in an environment where you have to ask for permission to upgrade and the IT department doesn't want to do it, etc., it's worth giving it a look. And how many of you are actually running 5.5? One, okay. Hope we improve on that. Now, we went from 5.3 to 5.5, and you might be asking, what about 5.4? Well, 5.4 did provide a lot of performance improvements over 5.3. But in most cases, you're either stuck at the PHP version bundle with your operating system, or you upgrade to the latest. I don't know many people that just say, I'm going to upgrade, but I'm just going to upgrade to one version before the latest. So since I picked Ubuntu 12.04, the bundle version, the one that's going to install, it's 5.3.10. So 5.4 kind of falls in between. If you're going to upgrade, just go to 5.5. So skipped it for this session. All right, so 5.5. So remember all that APC stuff we looked at just a minute ago? Well, PHP 5.5 flat out just deprecates APC. It says don't use it. It's actually not very compatible with it. And the reason is that PHP 5.5 comes already bundled with Zen Opcache, which does the exact same thing as APC, which is interpreting, compiling, saving the bytecode to memory, and then serving it. You actually have to set up PHP in a special way not to have this enabled by default. Once you install it, you can look in your PHP info, Zen Opcache, it'll tell you very clearly it's up and running and optimization's enabled. So, very easy to see that it's actually doing something. If you're using APC for user caching, which is different than just optimizing bytecode, it's if you're actually storing variables in your cache memory and everything, there's an extension called APCU that you can use with PHP 5.5. So you don't have to get rid of that altogether. You don't have to deprecate your own code base. If you are using those features, APCU is there for you. But if you're using it just for bytecode optimization, get rid of APC, let Zen Opcache do its thing. On top of that, APC's latest version was released in September 2012. So I guess it's not in very active development. It's another good reason to just go with Zen on cache. All right, so our third stack is going to be the LEMP stack with PHP-FPM. All right, so far, looked at some very low-hanging fruit. All you had to do was install some software and you were done, right? Very hands-off approach. You know, you get improvements for doing pretty much nothing. So for the next three stacks, 4, 5, and 6, we're going back to the original LEMP stack that we installed, but we're going to do a little bit of configuration. And we're actually going to be configuring Apache, not any of the other components. So, not going to look at all the options in detail, but if you remember, we had this little block of configuration settings. And I focus on this segment because once you start, looking, all, the main articles you're going to find are going to concentrate on this. There's a lot more you can do. You can disable extensions you're not using. You can tune up other parameters, but this gives you, pretty big payoff for little work, and it's easy to understand. So I wanted to focus on it. All right. So let's start with StartServers, MinSpareServers, MaxRequestsPerChild. What do those all mean? These three directives and those entries in the configuration file are referred to as directives in Apache. So these three directives regulate how many servers are started and how many will stay idle when there's no activity. So StartServers, you're just telling Apache that when it starts, how many processes you want to have there just waiting for connections. You got to keep in mind that every process uses memory, so you can say, oh, it would be awesome if I'm just ready and waiting with 100 processes there, just so when a connection comes in, nothing has to wait. Well, that's going to take a lot of memory, and if you remember, we're running on only 1 gig of RAM, so you got to be very mindful of how you set this up. So in older versions of Apache, it made sense to increase from the default of 5. The reason being that it had a built-in limit of starting 1 server per second. So if all of a sudden you had 30 connections coming in and you had just started the server, it would take a long time to actually get there. On the newer versions of Apache, and actually by newer, I use the term loosely, this has been around for a very long time, I believe since version 1.3. The ramp up, instead of being 1 per second, it starts on the first second, it does 1, and then it exponentially grows, so it does 2 on the next second, then 4, all the way up to 32. If you start getting to the 4 per second mark, it will log an entry in your log as an error, and it'll let you know that there's some going on, and you might want to look at tuning if that's your case, right? You might want to have a bigger server and set it to have more processes waiting. It's never happened to me, so if you're lucky enough to have that much traffic and you're having an issue, do tune this one out. In this case, we're going to leave it alone, just at 5. The documents say that you usually shouldn't have to mess with this setting. MinSpareServers. This is the number of idle servers available at any given time. So, let's say you have this to, and again, I believe we had it at MinSpare again at 5. So we're starting, there. We're starting, with 5. We get 3 connections, now we're down to 2. Well, Apache was on 3 more processes to wait because you want to have always 5 idle ones. So I'm going to read verbatim from documentation. Tuning of these parameters should only be necessary on very busy sites. Setting this parameter to a large number is almost always a bad idea. So that's exactly how they say it. Be careful when setting this up. Don't exhaust your memory. But if you feel necessary to just have more servers waiting, if maybe your traffic patterns are that, certain times of the day, just getting a lot of traffic influx, or all of a sudden, you got published somewhere where, you're starting to see a lot. Well, it might make sense to just have a lot more processes waiting, so when a request comes in, you don't have the overhead of having to start that process. MaxSpareServers, very similar to the minimum. except that, if there's too many sibling idle byte, it'll kill a few to reach the number that you said is your maximum. So setting this too high also can take a lot of your memory resources, so be careful. And again, I'm going to read from the documentation. Tuning of this parameter should only be necessary in very busy sites. Setting this parameter to a large number is almost always a bad idea. So you get the gist that Apache just, kind of wants to make it easy to run their servers without having to mess too much with it by most people. But they do offer a ton of documentation where, they to help you set things up right. Now, this one's the interesting one. This is where we start having some fun. It's max clients. Max clients is the number of clients that will be serviced at any given time. So anything above this number will be queued up. The default is 150, which is fairly high, if you think about it. When setting this up, be mindful. High setting can exhaust server resources, and too low can keep your clients waiting unnecessarily. So if you set this too low, you're like, well, since this takes a lot of memory, I'm going to go ahead and take it from 150 to 3. Well, what happens when you got 10 requests coming? There's 7 that get queued up. And, that can make your site appear very slow. So again, it's a little bit of black magic. You got to kind of see what works for you and test it out. And we're going to look at some ways of testing. So keep that in mind. MaxRequestsPerChild. This is a number of requests that any given Apache process will handle before dying. The default is 0, which means it'll handle unlimited connections or requests before dying. It never dies, in practical terms. There used to be issues with certain servers. I think one was an old version of Solaris that after 10,000 connections or something like that just started to have memory leaks. And that's why it made sense to set this up. If you don't have a really good reason to do this, just leave it at 0. No problem there. And don't set it too low either if you're actually going to set it up, because you will be responding processes all the time, and that creates overhead on your server. So 0, usually fine. So let's tune it up. We're actually going to mess with only one of these settings, and that's max clients. So the Apache documentation recommends focusing on your efforts in preserving RAM, which I think made pretty clear by now. And if you exhaust RAM, your server will start swapping memory to disk. I think pretty much everybody's familiar with the way you have RAM and then you have disk, and when your RAM runs out, it starts writing stuff to disk and using that as memory. That's a lot slower than your actual RAM. So you gotta avoid swapping at all costs. That's what makes your site look super slow. So there are a ton of settings and tricks available that we won't be discussing today, but we're going to look at max clients in particular. So let's do a little bit of quick math. We have a server with a gig of RAM that's 1,024 megabytes, and we need that to run the operating system, the database, and everything else you got running on that server, plus the web server. So let's suppose we want to limit how much memory Apache uses to half the available memory. It's at 512 megabytes. First thing we do, if you can run top on your command line, and that will show you how much Apache is, it'll show you all the processes. You can filter down to Apache, and you can see in that column right here, the one that says res, how big your Apache processes are. In this case, the average is about 36 megs per process. We have max clients set to 150, which is the default. If we all of a sudden became very popular, I don't know, if you got featured on the front pages /dot or, I don't know what else is popular today, Reddit, you'd have 36 megabytes times 150 max clients. That is about 5.5 gigs, which we don't have. That's over 5 times our available run, and it would make our server crash, no doubt. Because of the way Apache spawns new processes and all that stuff, you'll never get to the 5 gig mark. You won't start swapping to that level. You'll actually crash first. But just being mindful that you don't want to get to that, right? We want to limit it. So we said reliability more important than speed. We talked about that before. You know, I'd rather serve pages a little bit slower, but make sure I'm serving them, you know, and not just crashing. So we need to set some limits. How we do that? We said we want to use about 512 megabytes. We know our average process is about 36 megabytes. That gives us just about 14 max clients. That's less than 10 times, less than a tenth of what the default is, right? So this is just a kind of like a quick math type deal. I would recommend that you actually do a lot more research. You look at your average process at different times of the day, with different traffic loads, play around with, you know, a little bit more, a little bit less, until you find the actual setting that works for you. But that's quick math for now. You know, 14 will give you a good starting point. And you know, we're gonna start there. So what we're gonna do is for stacks 4, 5, and 6, we're going to change the max client settings, and we could do a lot more, but I just want to focus on what max clients does. And we're gonna set stack 4 to 14 max clients, stack 5 to 21 clients, and stack 6 to 7 max clients. So we start with the default, we did some math, we arrived at 14. So we start with that one, and then we take it, you know, down to 7 and up to 21. And we'll see how those perform. All right, now let's jump into PHP-FPM. Anybody familiar or ever heard of FPM? All right. Don't worry, we only have 2 more server setups before we get to the fun part of the presentation. So hang in there with me. So, FPM is the Fast CGI Process Manager. On your default configuration for the LAMP stack, you are actually processing the PHP code with an extension of Apache called mod PHP, which adds a lot of overhead to Apache. With FPM, what you're doing is basically just Apache will grab that request, pass it to FPM, FPM will process it, and then give it back to Apache to serve back. So you're offloading the processing of the code outside of the website. So here we are going to install FPM. Once you have it installed, we're going to leave the default version of 5.3.10 because we only want to focus on what FPM is doing. Here's the info page. You can see on the 3rd line you have Server API, FPM, Fast CGI. And just a reminder, you know, you can mix and match a lot of these things, right? You could start, you know, you can mess around with your Max clients, add FPM, and upgrade to PHP 5.5. You could do all those 3 things together and probably get a lot of, you know, performance improvements. I just wanted to kind of show them separately so you can get an idea of what you get out of each one. All right, so remember we looked at top and our memory usage was about 36 megs. Now that we offloaded that, Apache is using pretty much no memory. It's become a super light process. But FPM, on the other hand, it's you know, right there around 40 megs. So be mindful, you know, just because now Apache is not using much, you might be using the memory elsewhere. So just keep an eye on that. So number 7 is the LAMP stack with PHP-FPM. And last one, we're going to look at LEMP. Anybody knows about LEMP? No. You know about everything, man. All right, so LEMP, it's a little bit tricky because there's no E on it, actually. It's Linux, Nginx, which is spelled Nginx, but you know, Nginx is the E in here, MySQL and PHP. Nginx is another open source web server, but according to them, it's designed with performance in mind. I can't remember the guy's name, it's a Russian guy, started around 2002, 2003. It's not as popular as Apache, but it has a strong following, and there's a ton of documentation out there. It is very fast for certain applications, so you know, worth giving it a look. It's a little harder to set up than Apache, but it's definitely not hard. All right, now you might be thinking, this is a fraud. Where's the new hotness? You came here to look for performance, and I'm not talking about PHP-FPM. Everybody, hip hop, virtual machine, the new hot, hack the language, all this stuff. Honestly, I'm sorry to disappoint you. I haven't played around with it other than installing it once, looking at it, and then moving on. So I didn't feel right, bringing it here and trying to tell you all about it. So we won't be covering HHVM. Maybe I'll even come up with a whole new talk on that. But for now, we're gonna be sticking to LAMP stack and LEMP. All right. So now I have Nginx installed. We're back to LEMP. Just like in the Apache worker mode, which we looked at for FPM, Nginx will not process the PHP itself. It will offload it also to PHP-FPM. So in that sense, it's similar to Apache with FPM. If you're going to go through the trouble of installing FPM, you might want to try both web servers to see which one fits you best. And we're still rocking the good old 5.3 on this setup. All right, so with that, we covered all 8 stacks, and we're going to start the competition. If it wasn't clear by now, the results of this battle of the stacks doesn't mean much at all. It's just a fun way to see how all these technologies behave with a very simple set of tests and minimal configuration. I just want to give you some exposure to them, and hopefully if you do want to tune up your server, you will do a lot more work than this. All right, like we said, running on DigitalOcean 1 gig. You can see right there at the top is the configuration. And I have all these images, with all the different server setups that I did. They were all done on the same server. All right. The test consists of a default WordPress installation. Sorry, I didn't have time to do one for WordPress, one for Joomla. Hopefully, you'll still, get the same out of the test. So, default WordPress installation. Then running 2 different tests. On each configuration using loader.io. If you haven't used it, you can go to loader.io, and it's a free tool from the guys from SendGrid. It's got a really nice interface, and it lets you do some really cool tests against your server. So definitely recommend that one if you want to do load testing. Because imagine if you're just doing the load testing from your own computer, things like network conditions and whatnot could come into play. These guys use distributed networks, they hit your server from every angle, so it gives you a much better overview of how your server is performing. After we run each test, we compare how each setup did in regards to response time and error rates. And the ones that win, it's a head-to-head competition. One gets eliminated, one moves to the next round till we get to the last one. All right, the round 1 test, we had 2, we call it the steady and the busy. Steady is 1 client per second over 60 seconds, which is a decent amount of traffic if you actually think about it. That would mean 3,600 people hitting your site an hour. It's fairly nice. And the busy is 250 clients over 60 seconds. So you have multiple requests per second. Loader.io that I mentioned, this is what the tests look like. Once you run them, and it's nice, after they're run, they'll give you a little URL that you can go back and see the replay of your test. So I've actually, in the slides, which I'll share with you, they're already published, so I'll give you the URL to them. You have links to all the tests that are run for this, and you can go and see the replay of them. It's pretty cool. All right, so this is what our bracket looks like. I created this bracket at random. I just created an array with 8 elements, and I shuffled them 1 time, and whatever came out is how I performed the test. So we have, to recap, LEMP against LEMP with APC. We have LEMP with Max Clients 14 against LEMP with PHP 5.5. We have LEMP with PHP-FPM against Max Clients 7. We have default LEMP against the tuned-up LEMP with Max Clients 21. All right, let's look at the first matchup. And we have LEMP with Max Clients 14 and LEMP with PHP 5.5. See, the average time on Max Clients 14 is 265 milliseconds, which is excellent response time. But look at 5.5, it blows it out of the water with 68 milliseconds. And I'm talking WordPress here. This is not optimized software. You know, and we didn't touch any other settings. 68 milliseconds is a dream. Then error rate, we got 0 on PHP 5.5, but we have 6 errors and a response time of over 2 seconds on the LEMP with Max Clients 14. So 5.5 completely blows LEMP stack even with the Max Clients set up to something, you know, the optimized setting of 14, still kills it. All right, we have LEMP with PHP-FPM against LEMP with Max Client 7. Before I ran the test, I thought that PHP-FPM was going to totally kill it, and it didn't. So, you know, it's a little bit of an upset in the competition. We have average time of 393 milliseconds against 257 milliseconds. So in that sense, default LEMP with just a little bit of tuning did better. And look at the error rate. First, the average time went to almost 8 seconds with FPM, and then it aborted because once you get to 50% error rate, the test stops. What happened here? We ran out of memory. Remember how we saw that FPM was using a lot of memory? So maybe if you have a bigger server, FPM makes sense. Maybe you need to tune it further, but in this case, it was just the wrong choice for this kind of server. So don't just, you know, I think the lesson there is don't just go with what, you know, people are telling you is the new awesome, because it might not be the right, you know, setup for you. All right, we still had a lot of errors on the Max Client 7, but it's the winner nonetheless. So reliability trumps speed. All right, last matchup of the first round is default LEMP against Max Clients 21, and here default LEMP wins. So here we try to tune it up, and we actually messed it up. They both have, actually Max Clients 21 had a little bit better response time, just minimally, about 5 milliseconds on the steady test. But when you look at the BC test, default LEMP was under 2 seconds, and Max Clients 21 was over 3 seconds. So in this case, default wins. Right, we're going to the next round. We have LEMP with APC against LEMP with PHP 5.5, and that's a big, you know, the upcode cache rivalry of the, you know, classic. Not really. And then Max Client 7 against default LEMP. All right, so now that we got to the final four, anybody want to venture who's going to be the final winner of the whole competition? I'll give you a t-shirt at the end.
PHP 5.5.
All right, you get the t-shirt. All right, so for the final four, we actually changed the test. If no, we would be getting similar results to what we did in round 1. So we're going to go to 2 clients per second, as opposed to 1 for the steady test. And on the BC, we're going to do 250 clients, but over 30 seconds. So, you know, it's going to ramp up a lot faster. All right? So let's go. LEMP with APC against LEMP with PHP 5.5. It's actually 5.5 blows it out of the water. It's we got on the steady test. They both perform pretty well. You know, very good response times. But on the BC test, the APC goes to almost 2 seconds response time, and LEMP with PHP 5.5 stays at 341 milliseconds. I think there's no question about that. I mean, it's a huge improvement that you get with 5.5. All right, and the other matchup, we got LEMP with Max Client 7 and the default LEMP. And here you can see that Max Client 7 is struggling a bit on the BC test with a lot of errors and about 2 seconds response time. But default LEMP flat out didn't finish the BC test. And it was a lot higher on the average time on the steady test. So here shows you that defaults are good most of the time, but when you start getting any amount of significant traffic, your server will choke. And that's when you're going to have to start looking at tuning up or buying more hardware, which probably wouldn't get you that long. All right, so we're going to the finals. We got LEMP with PHP 5.5, our big favorite, and then, you know, a little Cinderella story with Max Client 7 making it all the way to the finals. And for the final round test, we have 500 clients over 30 seconds. That is very, very significant traffic. I don't know if any of you work on very high traffic sites, but that's a ton of people looking at your site. So let's look at how the matchup went. The final round test, average time 5.5 stayed at 392 milliseconds, still impressive performance, but even, and think, we still running with a 1 gig server. This is not much, and that's a ton of traffic running on WordPress, which is not a very optimized platform. That's excellent performance just by upgrading your PHP. Max Client 7, it couldn't run. I mean, the test just aborted right away. It hit the server and just crapped out, so. All right, so our big winner, our last stack standing, is LEMP with PHP 5.5. And let's look at our key takeaways. There's a lot of options available that don't cost you anything than your time. So exhaust all these before upgrading your server resources. Don't just throw money at the problem. All the tests were done on a server that costs $10 a month. So you saw how much traffic you can handle with just $10. I think it's pretty impressive. You know, we now know that that kind of server can withstand a pretty hefty load with very minimal configuration improvements. And thanks, y'all. That was the presentation. Do you have any questions?
I was just curious if you did comparison against the Nginx. The Nginx server? PHP 5.5 is in opcode?
5.5 with Nginx?
Yeah.
I didn't do that setup, but I bet that it would just go nuts. Because yeah, I actually like Nginx a lot on my main server where I could, you know, I use that for my own site at biglabs.com and for preview site for my clients. And I use Nginx all the time, and I love it. And it's super stable, fast. It's great. I also run another server on Rackspace that's for a client that has a big installation of WordPress with a ton of users and everything, and his server is a lot bigger. It's 16 gig of RAM and everything. On that, I'm using 5.5 with FPM, and it also runs amazingly. But you know, just pick and choose, combine these things, you're gonna get a ton of performance. I mean, the default LEMP is good for small stuff, but you can get a ton of performance out of you know, just picking these components and putting them together. Yeah.
One comment. Vic, our keynote speaker, is from Anything Digital, and they make one of the big Joomla components, SH404 SEF, which does search engine friendly URLs. I found this out the very hard way with a client. SH404 SEF is only guaranteed to work with Apache.
Well, there you go. So,
You know, and the client says, "Oh, I want to run fast." When he was configuring his hosting, I'll do Nginx.
right.
Didn't work.
That's a good tip right there. So, you know, like I said, not everything, you know, not every setup is good for every situation. So just, you know, do your research. I guess you have to find the hard way.
Oh yeah.
And then, you know, maybe you could use, you know, PHP-FPM and see, you know, if you can save some RAM from Apache, or maybe my PHP works just fine, but you know, take it to 5.5 and use the opcode cache. Maybe you're stuck in a server that you can only use 5.3, then install APC. So there's a lot of options to really get better performance. All right, so you can get in touch with me. That's my email. That's me on Twitter. And if you want to get the slides, you can go to speakerdeck.com/nickdev. Just one sec. And the slides for this presentation actually come with the speaker notes, so you can go get them there. You had a question.
What do you do? How do you do the load testing that you were doing when you're setting up the clients to do your server desks and things like that? How are you generating those numbers and getting those analytics?
You do with loader.io. I don't think I'm connected to the internet here, but I would love to show you. If not, you can probably look at it yourself. You go to loader.io, they let you have for free up to 3 applications at a time, and you can archive old applications and just add new ones. It's perfectly fine. It's sufficient, you know, you don't need a pro account. Most of the basic tests are sufficient for most people. They offer pro services where you can have to, you know, use up to 50,000 clients or something crazy like that. You know, that's what I use. You set up a new server, they want you to prove that it's your server you tested against, so you just, you know, add a little file or a DNS record, and after that it just lets you hit it as hard as you want.
Gotcha. Are there good, are there good ways to optimize things like MySQL and things like that, in addition to just PHP?
Yes, you can do, you know, you can profile your queries to see how they're performing. There's tools like AutoTuner, and Percona also offers some really good performance tools that will look at your server, look at your usage, read your logs, and tell you what things you can improve. So, you know, there's like table fragmentation, and there's, you know, query optimization. There's a lot of things. You can also add other components like memcache, where you can start storing, you know, certain objects in memory and things like that to really get better performance out of it. But I just wanted to focus on the server stack.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Nick.